Good evening. Welcome. So we talk about tonight Philippi, where Christianity first came to Europe. So what we're doing partly tonight, it's some history, partly it's about biblical study, and partly it's about a holiday slideshow, so I can't avoid some of that. But what are we talking about? So we're talking about Philippi, which is it's a ruin in northern Greece, in the area of what's known as Macedonia. It is no longer a city, but as I'll tell you, it stretches back to 360 BC. The site where the city now stands had been established as a small community of people who had come from the island of Thasos. So if you can see where the red pin is, that's where Philippi is. Down there in the Aegean Sea, there is an island, just wanted to creep up into it. That's the island of Thasos. People from there, around about 360 BC, left the island, went to start to colonise this area. And they chose the site of Philippi for its strategic importance. If you look there, you can see the dark green on either side. That's some mountainous wooded terrain. The lighter green brownie, there's more valleys. So sitting where Philippi is, they get to control all of the ability for people to leave from the coastline and go up into the inner areas of ancient Macedonia. City was first called Crenides, which means springs. Those numerous springs around the area allowed it to be both an agricultural area, plenty of wood supplies from all of the forests that are around, plus it was very rich in gold and silver. So it became a very prosperous, very sought-after city. So much so that 4 years after it was founded, other people said, we want to go and invade this and take over this city. So the people of Philippi, or Crenides as it was called then, calls out to Philip of Macedonia, "Come and save us, Philip. We want to be protected by you." Well, he does that, but doesn't so much protect them as he said, I like this city too. I'm going to take over the city. And he names it in honour of himself. Apart from that, Philip of Macedonia has two other claims to fame. One of them is the father of Alexander the Great, but in his own right, he was a great king. The other, and this is where it's just a little bit of a holiday slideshow, is that his mausoleum is one that modern archaeologists were able to find completely intact. So it was in 1977. This guy called Manolus Andrionicus was the professor of classical archaeology at the University of Thessaloniki. When he'd been growing up and been a student archaeologist, he'd been sent to this area to be able to start discovering and digging up tombs of the ancient kings of Macedonia. He's there and he's looking, thinking, I don't think we're digging in the right place. I think we should be digging over there. Because over there is a mound that is similar to this, but about 4 times the size of that. That is a modern day creation of a tumulus, an ancient burial mound. Underneath, what was there originally was about 4 times the size of this, and it came to be known as Great Tumulus. It's in an area of modern-day Greece called Vergina. It's about 230 kilometres away from Philippi. So Manolus Andrionicus starts digging. And what he finds when he digs into this tumulus is 4 tombs. 2 of them have been raided in thousands of years before, but 2 of them are completely intact. And they both look, that's the one of Philip of Macedonia. So that doorway there in the middle, that is a full height doorway and probably even higher than full height. It is, and then there's another one that is similar to that is nearby. This one they believe is Philip of Macedon's, The other one is a grandson of his, a son of Alexander the Great. So they find it completely intact. The other two tombs that are there have obviously been raided, all of the contents have been stolen, but these two are intact, and they have all of the stuff that would have been put in there when these people were buried, including gold boxes like that into which their bones would have been placed. So they would have been cremated and their bones gathered up and put into there. Above that box is a golden diadem, so that would have gone around the head of the king. There's also all of the furniture and goblets and cooking utensils, weapons, all the stuff that it was believed that they needed in death. And it was all found completely and utterly intact. Alongside of that, there was these things. That's almost a bed head, if you can imagine the idea of a bed head. And upon it were these figurines. Over the 2,500 years since they were first put in there, the figurines have detached, had fallen on the ground and become just a mess and been destroyed, but they've tried to re-establish them, and that's why they look as though they're just a little bit disjointed and don't look complete. But they're telling a story. It becomes the story of Philip of Macedon, probably his funeral, at which Alexander the Great is there. Those are two of the figures that they find in that storytelling. And they believe that those are as close as possible to original facsimiles, the original expression of what Philip and Alexander the Great looked like. So Philip of Macedon, is buried in these tombs. They believe that they're able to tell that it was the tomb of Philip of Macedon from two particular things. One of them is that they found this suit of armour. Down the bottom is the greaves, the armour plating that went around their legs. One of the legs the greaves is misshapen, and they know that Philip of Macedon had a misaligned tibia because he was injured in a battle. The remains of the skull also show damage to a right eye caused because of an arrow that penetrated, and they know that happened to Philip of Macedon as well. So they believe that they have found the genuine tomb of Philip of Macedon. There was another woman buried in there. They're not quite too sure who she was. And then this other tomb that they believe is Alexander the Great's son, Philip's grandson. So this is about 230 kilometres away from Philippi. That great big mound, the tumulus that I show, has been recreated since 1977 when these tombs were excavated. It now provides a roof over the mausoleums, and you can walk around there and look at all of the different artefacts that they've pulled out of it. So we go back. We go back to Philippi. Under Philip, Philippi was expanded and fortified. Walls were built, marshes were drained, and a theatre was constructed. And Macedonians settled in that city to ensure its loyalty. So that's just the amphitheatre that becomes part of every Greek city. So every Greek city needed to have an amphitheatre. Whilst we think that we go to the theatre to be entertained, to watch a play, listen to some music, apparently in Greek theatres or amphitheatres, that was only about something that happened once a year. The amphitheatre was there for the people of the city to get together and engage in political discussions, to be able to debate what's going on with the city. I don't know if this is the case where it was in Philippi, but when we were in Ephesus, we were told, and Ephesus is in modern day Turkey, but it still would have all been Greece back then, that every 8 days they would elect 2 new city council leaders. So just because everybody got involved in the running of the city. So they say that this is a Greek amphitheatre, primarily because the stage is round. So see right down the very bottom, the stage is round. That's a characteristic of a Greek amphitheatre. the characteristics of a Greek amphitheatre is that they would go up the side of the hill, and if the side of the hill wasn't completely amphitheatre-like, well, the steps and the stairs that go up the hill would just fit the ground that they were to sit on. The other characteristic of a Greek amphitheatre, again, and this is important because we'll come back to this in a moment, they didn't have any backing. So we have a wall behind our stages. Greek amphitheatres, you just looked out to whatever was on the other side of it. Philip the Great also built an Acropolis. Acropolis was a part of every Greek city. It was built on a very high point of the city area. We didn't actually climb up there because we're not going to climb up there. It was a citadel. It was used for religious activities. It was a fort. It was a place where the royal people or the people of high status used. You've probably heard of that place, the Acropolis in Athens. Well, the Acropolis happens to just be an Acropolis that happens to be in Athens. But apparently, if you talk about the Acropolis, you talk about that one in Athens. If you talk about the Acropolis of Philippi or the Acropolis of Assos or the Acropolis of Thessaloniki, you're talking about an Acropolis in those cities. It's just a little bit, we're the biggest, we're the best, we get to claim the word "the" in front of it all. So Philip II establishes Philippi as this significant city in his country. Continues to be a place of resources. It continues to be a place close to the harbour of Neapolis because of those land routes from the harbour up into the back country. It remains under what's known as the Antigonid dynasty, which is the dynasty that arises in that area after Alexander the Great dies and divides his empire into three. But then 168 BC, the Romans come along. They take over Roman control of the whole area, and the city comes under Roman control. Continues to prosper, primarily because of those rocks. Those stones there are what's known, or as the remnants of what's known as the Via Egnatia, or Egnatia. It was a major road that went from the Adriatic Sea right through across into what is now modern-day Istanbul, Constantinople. It was the main road that everybody travelled back and forwards along. Paul would have used it when he was there. Because of that road, and it went straight through. So that road there is right in the middle of Philippi. Because it was there, everybody travelled through Philippi. So it was become a major source. It was strategic. It was for trade, for movement, for military logistics. Via Egnatia still continues to have a significant place in the life of Greece. So that road street there is the main street that goes through Thessaloniki, and it's called Egnatia Street. So it's not actually the exact location where the Via Egnatia went, but it was so important to them, they went and called the major street that goes from one end of the city to the other, Egnatia Street. So, major turning point comes from Philippi in 42 BC. There it is, and that's a picture of Caesar Augustus. If you're a Year 12 student, you should know a lot about Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus and together with Mark Antony had this great battle with Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Julius Caesar, who they do know a lot about. They had two engagements near Philippi, and it's that battle that finally ends the Roman Republic and rises up the monarchy that takes over as the Roman Empire, which then has many hundreds more years to go. After the Battle of Philippi, Octavian, later Augustus, establishes Philippi as a Roman colony, and he settles his troops there. So this brought Latin and Roman culture, institutions and law, and plenty of migrants to the city. Somebody I was reading said that outside of Rome, Philippi was the most Roman city in the Roman Empire. So it's very, very much a case It has been taken over. So they do things. So we're back here in the amphitheatre. So they expanded and they make it Roman. So Roman amphitheatres, different from Greek amphitheatres, didn't follow the curve of the land. They made it absolutely semicircular. If the land didn't go up where it was, they just built it so that the the rows of seating and stairs made it. Roman amphitheatres were semicircle with their stage, but because that was a Greek one, they still kept the circle, and they always had a wall behind them, and some underneath the wall they would have had what that is, the behind the stage things, corridors and places for the performers to go and the lines to be kept and the gladiators to be solved. The other thing they did to this amphitheatre was, if you see right down at the very front, the front couple of rows of seating seems to be a different colour, a little bit more lighter. Well, Greek amphitheatres, the seating went right down to the ground. And if you're sitting in the front row of the seats, your feet are on the stage, on the semicircular thing, which is great. If you're engaged in discussion or philosophy or in politics, you don't mind that. Romans would have gladiators, and they would have lions eating Christians, and you really don't want your feet sitting on the same floor where that happens. So they actually took out the first couple of rows of seating so that there became a drop from the first row down to the stage. So all of that started to change. Being a military, so they then, alongside of that, they have both Greek and Roman gods. They introduced gods from other places because this is a place of many different nationalities and cultures are coming. They each get to live their own way. But interestingly, there's no archaeological evidence to show that there was any Jewish synagogues or any significant number of Jews in that area. And as we'll find out a little bit more about what the Jews end up doing. So this is the city that Paul is called to go. So these are just a couple more pictures. That's a engraving in some stone pillar. This is the city that Paul is called to go. The biblical story of Philippi starts in Acts chapter 16. Paul and his companions travelled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. So province of Asia is now modern-day Turkey. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After Paul had seen this vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Just something that's got nothing to do with Philippi at all. Would you notice the change in the language in that passage? At the beginning, we're talking about Paul and his companions. By the end of it, we are travelling to Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So somewhere in this moment here, from Troas to Macedonia, Luke joins Paul and his travelling companions. But anyway, that's just got nothing to do with anything else. So why? And that's where they are. Troas is a ruin that's in modern day Turkey. They would have had to have travelled across to the Aegean Sea to what is called there Neapolis, and we'll get into a couple of other names for this city in a moment. Why go west? Sitting there, and I was thinking, particularly when I was here in Turkey and Greece, if you think of where Jerusalem is and Palestine, it sits at the crossroads of the ancient world. You could have gone, you could have gone east and gone to Persia and India and China and all that. Or you could have gone west into the Roman Empire. God knew what was best, and God calls them. But when you think about it, going west into the Roman Empire, there was Roman rule. from the border of Scotland and England right through to the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq. The Romans are in control. They've got their armies, they've got their law, they've got their way of doing things. They've got the Pax Romana. They want everybody to be quiet and in good, decent order so that they can make as much money as they possibly can. There were the roads, the AI of the first century, the most cutting innovation that was available in those days. So we saw the Via Egnatia, originally just about moving Roman armies from one place to the other. But they were the way in which trade was able to take place, messages were able to be shared, people were able to move around. It was safe, it was quick, it was convenient for them. And there was a common language. Latin was the language of the empire, was the language of business throughout Philippi. If you find any inscriptions written on any of the stonework, it's all in Latin. But there was also Greek, or particularly Koine Greek or Common Greek, and it was the language of philosophy. There was more elaborate word variations in Koine Greek than anywhere else. And that variety of words and the tonal intonations of it made it very useful and very appropriate for poetry and expressing a range of different ideas. And you will know, those of us who preach, you often look at wording to say, this is what the word says in English. But what it really means is, and we go off and we spend 10 minutes telling you, whilst it says that, this is what Paul was actually getting in that. And that's because of this Greek language that is so much richer than our English language. Think about the word for love. We just love, I love my friend. I love my wife. I love my dog. I love ice cream. But not all the same way. There's filial love, the friendship love. Agape, a selfless, self-giving love. Eros, sexual love. There is this richness that's in there. And I was even just struggling with this on Monday when I was looking at first chapter of Philippi for our sermon on Sunday. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 27, Paul writes, "Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ." I spent some time, what's he doing that? Basically he's saying, behave, do the right thing. But there is so much more that the original hearers of his letter in Philippi would have understood. Paul uses the word there, polituomai. Nobody knows any better, so that's what I'm saying. It's the only place in any one of his writings that he uses that word. It's derived from a noun that he uses in Philippians 3, verse 20, where he writes, "But our citizenship is in heaven." So it's about citizenship, it's about belonging. So again, think Roman colony, where the Roman citizenship was so vitally important to them. So people are thinking, well, I'm a Roman citizen, and we'll talk about what citizenship meant in a moment. I'm a citizen, I've got this, or I'm not a citizen and I miss out on it. The verb means to exercise, so polyeitiomai means exercise the rights and duties of citizenship. It's about a broader thing than just being a good person and behave. So Paul was able just in this one word to be able to encapsulate something far more than just what we read. Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy. So our translations are correct. The best biblical scholarship, the best language scholarship has been able to interpret them best as they can, but there is a richer wealth that Paul would have sat behind that no single word can be able to capture. That language, Koine Greek, is no longer spoken, so the language that they speak in Greece at the moment is Greek, but it's not the same language. The other thing that would help to go west is the multiple religions and openness to other religions. One way that the Romans maintained the Pax Romana was to be able to allow people in their countries to be able to continue to worship their gods. So there would have been Greek temples and there would have been temples to Roman gods and other different gods around the place. They didn't try to eradicate them. They allowed them each to be able to flourish in their own way, provided that They didn't interfere with what the Romans wanted to do, and provided that the emperor and emperor worship that came to be established was the dominant God who was worshipped in all of that. So in all of that, Judaism was a tolerated religion because it said, no, we've got one God and Caesar is not it. So God says, go west. Go on into what we now know as Europe. The traditional location for Paul arriving is the modern city of Kavala. It's called Neapolis in Roman times. In Acts, it's called the New City. Putting out from the harbour at Troas, we made a straight run for Samothrace. The next day, we tied up at New City and walked from there to Philippi, the main city in that part of Macedonia, and even more importantly, a Roman colony. We lingered there for several days. So this is the harbour at modern-day Kavala, ancient Neapolis, or New City. It's just a little city where people live and enjoy themselves. Just up from there, there is a church that is established to recognise Paul's landing there, and a fresco that sits outside, and that's a little bit of a close-up on it. So you've got Paul in one side being called by the Spirit of Jesus, hey, leave Turkey, Asia, and come across here. And then you've got Paul travelling across the sea and arriving in Philippi. If you just turn around and look, kind of turn 180 degrees from where I'm standing, you look down the road and that's how close it is to the harbour, that church. So that's, which I'm just trying to think, I haven't got how far that is, but it's very, very close anyway. It's half an hour, probably not, 10-minute bus ride from there to Philippi. At this stage, this is about 49, 50 AD. Philippi's got a population of about 10,000 people there. About a third of those are probably Roman citizens. Whilst Luke tells us that it is the main city in that part of Macedonia, it is not the main city of Macedonia. At this stage, Macedonia is divided into 4 administrative regions. That's probably one of 4 lesser, provincial cities. All the gold has been mined. It's now an agricultural centre. Being on the edge of that, still that fertile plain, there's a lot of grain and wine is produced in that. So we read on in Acts chapter 16. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshipper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptised, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. So I said there's no archaeological evidence that there was a synagogue in Philippi. And not even any Jews, because notice, Lydia is a worshipper of God. She's a Gentile who's following God rather than being a Jew herself. So she worships outside of the city walls. This, they believe, it's when you hear people when they talk about, either Israel or Greece, Turkey, the traditional site, we had a guess and we think this is it. So that's a creek, that's a river that's nearby. What they've built since then is this baptistry. So that just in the foreground of that picture, it's very hard to take pictures of stones and ruins like this. But in the foreground there is the ruins of a baptistry. And only about 30 years ago, the local bishop built this in the middle, a little island in the middle of that river. It's a little baptism area. You can be baptised in that water, or we shared communion in that area. Where I'm standing to take that photo, there's another little amphitheatre there. Very Greek, because it doesn't conform to it conforms to the patterns of the surrounding area. Excuse me. So Lydia would have been baptised traditionally according to that, as well as that outdoor baptistry area. Again, if you turn 180 degrees from where I'm standing, there is a big church designed for having baptisms. We were there on a Sunday, and they were preparing for a baptism, and it's a very big deal. Everybody gets dressed up in their very best, almost clubbing gear. We were in Thessaloniki the day before on Saturday and looking around in churches, and they're having baptisms there. Unlike us, where you have the baptism as part of the Sunday worship service, baptisms in the Greek Orthodox Church are a separate occasion where family and friends gather. You do it for the child, and then you have an incredibly elaborate party. So all of this was set up for the party, and this is just in the grounds of that area that we're saying. There were about 3 of these set up for subsequent parties for families that would be coming and celebrating the baptism of their child. So we move on. Once when we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. She followed Paul and the rest of us shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left her. When her owners realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. One of the worst things that you can do in ancient Rome, or at least in the Roman Empire, was to upset business, was to break the Pax Romana, because the Romans just wanted to keep everybody in control and quiet and making money so that they can tax it and become richer. Every Greek and Roman city had a marketplace, or in Greek, an agora. That's the agora of Philippi. We couldn't actually go down into it, but in the background, I'll talk about that. That's a church. So don't look at those buildings in the background, but in the foreground, you'll see basically a flat rectangle. The agora was a very large, open rectangle. In the middle, there was nothing. That gives you a little bit more of a close-up on it. Around the side, and that's not my picture, by the way, but around the side, there were porticos, and then next to the porticos were shops that were enclosed. Lydia would have had her business there somewhere or other. Lydia was a dealer in purple cloth, so she would have been set up somewhere in there. The agora was the place where you went shopping, where parts of government were conducted, where people would gather together for general celebrations of life, might be religious or private activities. It was the place, the city centre, in which everybody went, and it was open 7 days a week. And it's to hear that Paul would have been taken and been brought before the magistrates for breaking the peace. Luke goes on. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." Just excuse me. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he had received these orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once all the prison doors flew open, and everyone's chains came loose. The jailer woke up himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in his house. At that hour of the night the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household. In modern-day Philippi, they have found the jail that Paul was in. And we know absolutely for a fact that that is the jail that he was in because it says it on the door. Yeah, that was actually the only building that had a sign on it and all of that. Probably in all reality, they say that it wasn't the jail, that it was originally a water cistern. And when it dried up, they converted it into something else, a shrine. And now it becomes the traditional site in which Paul was imprisoned. Luke goes on. When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, "Release those men." The jailer told Paul, "The magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave. Go in peace." But Paul said to the officers, "They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now do they want to get rid of us quietly? No. Let them come themselves and escort us out." The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. They came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. After Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house, where they met with the brothers and sisters and encouraged them. Then they left. It was really important to be a Roman citizen in those days. Apart from the fact that you had the right to vote, as we see there, a Roman citizen wasn't able to be bound, couldn't be imprisoned without trial. They couldn't be whipped, which was a very common thing to extract a confession from somebody. And if they felt that they weren't receiving justice from the local ruler, they could appeal direct to the Roman Emperor. And we see Paul does that later on when he's in Caesarea, down in modern-day Israel, and he gets taken to Rome. You could claim these things and people had to believe you. And whilst it might seem to be, a way that you can just get away, get out of it cheaply, Emperor Claudius, who was the emperor at that time, actually made it, he made it that if you did claim to be a Roman citizen falsely, you would be put to death. So people didn't claim this unless it was genuine. It's not known how long Paul and his companions stayed in Philippi. But generally, the pattern of his missionary journeys is he didn't spend very long in any one place. But he moves on. He continues going along the Via Egnatia, Amphipolis, Apollonia, Thessaloniki, Berea, down to Athens and then back to Jerusalem. Paul returns to Philippi one more time. In Acts chapter 19, we're told, after all of these things have been accomplished, Paul resolved in the Spirit to go through Macedonia and Achaia and then to go to Jerusalem. He said, "After I've gone there, I must also see Rome." Then in Acts 20, verses 1 to 6, after the uproar had ceased, Paul sent for the disciples. After encouraging them and saying farewell, he left for Macedonia. When he had gone through those regions and had given them much encouragement, he came to Greece, where he stayed for 3 months. He was about to set sail for Syria when a plot was made against him by the Jews. So he decided to return through Macedonia. He was accompanied by a list of very special people whose names are all recorded in the book of Acts, and you can read them for yourselves. They went ahead and were waiting for us in Troas, but we sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days we joined them in Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. So that becomes the end of Paul's encounters in the city of Philippi. There is the letter to the Philippians. And in 2 weeks' time, if you're interested in coming back, I'm going to unpack that letter. But Philippi continued to be a place of significance for Christianity. There were, there were early churches built, possibly being built upon other already established buildings. The early Christian monuments of Philippi are some of the best preserved examples of religious architecture. Particularly, there are 3 religious buildings. There's what's known as Basilica A, which is a complete ruin now. That would have been built somewhere between the 4th and 6th centuries AD. It's, if you care enough, it's 130 metres long, 50 metres wide. It's got 3 naves, and you can still see various elements of what would have originally have been the church. There's also, and this is where it's way off in the distance because we couldn't get down there, but those ruins that are right in the very back, almost immediately in front of the tree line, are what's known as Basilica B. Again, another basilica that would have come along later on after Basilica A. And then there is what's known as the octagonal basilica. It's not just a church that's in the shape of an octagon, but an entire ecosystem of buildings. It's got the church, it's got a 2-storey bishop's palace, it's got a liturgical fountain, it's got a baptistry, it's got accommodation for pilgrims, and a monumental gate. So that's part of the ruins. That's the part that sits behind the communion table. That's where all of the priests would have sat during worship services, been able to lead it. There still is underneath the covering the original mosaic floor. And that's all there is. Again, it's very hard to be able to get pictures of all of this. Philippi continued to be a place that was of significance right through the Byzantium Empire. There was buildings, rebuildings, life there. It was about 1204 when the Fourth Crusade came through, that by then the city was starting to go through a number of different hands, Frankish, Serbians, Ottomans. It was gradually banned in about 14th century. By then people had moved away, it was declining. It was being hit by a couple of earthquakes, which are very common around that area, and people were coming in and taking the cut stone and taking it away to build other cities and other places. The end. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, Wendy's got the microphone and she will come and you can ask, and if not, we can all go home. Bob's got one. Of course he will.
Thank you, David. That's been fantastic.
Yes.
The way in which the Roman Empire tolerated religions is something that I was impressed with what you said there. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about Jesus before Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate couldn't understand what all the fuss was about, because he was of the opinion, like the Roman Empire was, of tolerating religions. Mm. And so, in a sense, Pilate basically said to the Jewish leaders, you blokes, what are you on about? And I think I've even heard in some quarters Pilate was regarded as a saint because of his tolerance with Jesus.
Oh, okay.
He tolerated
yeah.
the faith that Jesus was expressing.
Yeah. But yes.
So in the questioning,
in
the questioning of Pilate by Pilate of Jesus, this became apparent. I was just impressed with the way you mentioned that again. I was taken by the fact that the Roman Empire tolerated religions all over the place. And that's why there was the peace, the Pax Romana.
Yeah, there was. But then Jesus said, I never came, I never came to bring peace. I came to bring division. And, and the writings that Paul says, when he's embedded in this this society that has got so many different religions. I was really struck when we were in Istanbul. So Istanbul is a conservatively Muslim country now. And the law says that, how you've got the call to prayer and you've got the minarets, 120 decibels at least they have to be called out from. And I stood one day, there is Hagia Sophia. So at one stage it was a Christian cathedral, largest enclosed space in the entire world. It became a basilica when the Ottomans came in. It became a mosque. When the Turkish Republic came in, it became a museum. Now it's gone back to part museum, part mosque. You got that at one end. Then you got at the other end what's known as the Blue Mosque, which is another beautiful mosque, which about 16th century, both very lively. And then in the middle, this has got nothing to do with it. You've got the remnants of the Roman hippodromes. Where they used to have their horse racing, and it's just an open space. And it came time for the midday prayer, and from one end you'd hear somebody calling out to prayer. He would stop, and you'd hear it from the other end. He was calling out to prayer, and so you've got this, and not that it affected me because it was too early in the morning, but people would talk about being woken up by this call to prayer. So you've got this overtly expression of religion. And Paul comes in there and writes, one God, one faith, one baptism, one Lord, and there's about 6 or 7 of them. I can't remember what they're all. And he stands in the face of all of this idea that we can just, we can tolerate different ways. And he says, no, there is one way that we are called to live. And as we went around all of these different ruins and we looked at different ruins, including churches that I showed you there, but also ruins of civilizations that have built themselves on a particular religious understanding and expression of what their gods were and how you had to respond to their gods. I thought, why is ours any different? Why is it? Why won't in 2,000 years' time people be coming back and explaining and understanding, seeking to understand Christianity as another failed, doomed, mythological thing? I think the difference is that there is one living God that we are based around, not a series of different thought patterns that we create, but it's rather a God who calls us into life in and of himself. Don't know if that answered your question, but I just wandered off on my own little thing. Yeah, fascinating, yes.
David, you mentioned at the time of Paul coming that there was a paucity of Jews and an absence of Judaism, but I understand that there was something that happened later. How did that impact upon the Christian community of Philippi with the presence of Jews? Was there any...
What happened later on?
Yes. Once the church was established in Philippi, how did the presence then, or later presence of Judaism, impact on the church?
I don't know.
Bit obscure. Okay.
We didn't hear about that. I didn't hear of any story of it, apart from these God-fearers out by the river. I haven't heard of any other.
I'm just mindful of things happening in Gaza at the moment. That's all.
Yes. No, nothing like that in that area that I'm aware of. No.
Thanks,
Okay. No? Okay. Thank you very much for coming out. Appreciate that. 2 weeks' time, if you're interested, I'll unpack all of what sits behind the letter to the Philippians, which, let's see what we have to say about that. Sorry? Oh, absolutely. Well, surprisingly not. No. I enjoyed it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff to do, and traipsing all over in the heat and across all of these different Yeah, ruins. And you kind of think, now, which ruin was this that we went to? But they're very good. Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.